We have been working together through a book called Boundaries for Your Soul. It's a book by Allison Cook and Kimberly Miller. And for the last few weeks, we've been talking about what happens when we come up against the challenging parts of other people, when parts of other people emerge, emotions and things like that. And sometimes we don't really know where it's coming from, and we have to deal with this in the person in front of us. So, how can we maintain a healthy distance from someone else's parts, especially if the unhealthy parts of the other person are unsafe or unhealthy for us? So there's a few things that we'll talk about today. One of them is we have to remember that the other person isn't completely evil. They are a creation of God, and they're probably acting from entrenched or wayward and, yes, probably well-meaning parts of themselves. If you think about all the parts that you have inside of you that can emerge at any given time, well, you'll realize that other people have those parts as well. Sometimes it can help if you can see what's going on underneath the surface in another person's life. And a lot of times, frankly, we can't see what's going on underneath someone else's life. So one of the things I encourage people to do is to pray and ask God for wisdom. What's going on with this person that's in front of me that I'm having a tough time with? See, once you see what may be the driving force for this other person, it can become easier not to blame them, and it can be easier to have compassion on them. I've often said something like, what has this person been through that they react in this way to this situation, or they react this way to me? What must they have been through? They must have been through some very difficult times. I had 16 years of conflict with someone in my life. And after 16 years of conflict, once I understood what was going on underneath that person and what was driving them, I haven't had a problem with that person since. After 16 years of like every 3 or 4 months having some big problem with them, it completely went away once I understood what was going on underneath the surface for them. So it can be a very powerful thing. If you can ask God to give you wisdom in that way. Well, what else can you do? You can list off-limit topics of conversation. So there may be certain things that you just can't talk with other people about, or certain people. Politics and religion come up. Maybe there's a reason that we're not supposed to talk about those at the dinner table, right? There's some people you can't talk politics and religion with. There are people that you can't talk about other topics with because of wherever you're at on that or wherever they're at. And maybe you need to tell the person that and say, I'm not going to talk to you about these things. Another thing you can do is change the subject. Someone brings up a subject that feels unsafe to you, you can change the subject, bring up something else. Sometimes you may need to even excuse yourself from a conversation. You may need to go take a break and then come back, and hopefully come back in a better space to be able to engage with that person. Sometimes people find it helpful to take a drink of water. Sometimes we need scripts. We need to write out what we would like to say so that we can speak assertively in a certain situation. Most of us don't resolve conflict well. Why? Because we don't have models for dealing with conflict well. So I would encourage you to read up on conflict resolution scripts. Memorize the scripts. Try them. Something like, I am concerned about is a good script, right? I am concerned about, and then tell the person what you're concerned about. Another one that I like is, I value. And tell the person what you value, and let them know that when a certain thing happens in your relationship with them, it feels like that value isn't being held up at that time, and that value is really important to you. Another thing you could say is, when you do X, I feel Y, right? So when you stomp on my towel, I feel disappointed because I was going to use that towel to dry off or whatever, something like that, right? When you do X, I feel Y. You tell the person when they do that certain behavior, let them know how it makes you feel. You're not accusing them, you're not blaming them of trying to make you feel that way. You're just letting them know how you perceive it. Another one I love is this one is, I notice and I prefer. So I notice that you stomp on my towel every day. I would prefer if you would leave it hung up and drying there, so when it comes time I can grab it. So you tell the person what you notice that's happening, and you tell them what you would prefer, and sometimes that's enough for the other person to get the point. Another thing people have found helpful is using the buddy system and promising yourself never to be alone with a person. If they continually treat you poorly, you may need a buddy, and don't be alone with them. Another thing you can do is remind yourself that fighting with a deeply entrenched protective part of another person is a battle that you're not going to win. I like to say it this way: you can't reason with emotion. When someone's being emotional, you really can't often reason with that emotion. There are two different parts of our brain, or probably more. I'll just simplify it to two different parts of our brain. That person is being super emotional with you is probably in the right side of the brain. They're probably in the survival part of the brain. And so when you try to be logical with them, it's just not happening. There's some other things we can do for ourselves. In these kind of situations, we can imagine that we have an injured or vulnerable part of ourself, and we can imagine that part in its own little room inside of our soul. And we can assure that part of us that it has everything it needs for protection, right? Sometimes we feel vulnerable in some of these relationships with challenging parts of other people. Imagine that part of you that's feeling vulnerable in its own little room inside your soul, and tell it that it has everything it needs for its protection. Psalm 3 and verse 3 says, God, you are a shield around me. You are my glory, and you are the lifter of my head. And so it can be important. It can be a good thing for us to remind ourselves that God is there to protect us and help us. If things don't get better with this person that's challenging you, it may be time to get some healthy distance from that person. Sometimes it may mean we just need to get some distance geographically. Sometimes maybe not as many phone calls, or whatever it is where you interact with the person. You may just need some space and some time. And the last thing I'll say is if you have an angry, protective part of you, it may want to get even or make some kind of remark toward this person who's challenging you. What you can do there is, through your prayerful imagination, consider first giving this part of you, this part that's really protective, what we would call a Medal of Honor for its faithful service. It's been watching out for you all these years, right? Then put it to work as your newly appointed boundaries advisor, alerting you to times when your safety zone may be violated. And let this advisor know that you have a spirit-led self, that you have the spirit of God inside of you, and that part of you is now going to take the lead. Instead of your angry, protective part taking the lead, the spirit-led part of you can take the lead, and that part of you that has always been there to protect you can sit back a little bit, because let's face it, we're all adults now, and that part of us that's led by the Spirit of God can help keep us safe. And we had a lot of ideas that we put out today, and we'll probably talk about more as our meeting goes along here, of ideas of how we can keep ourselves safe in these situations. We've been discussing a book called Boundaries for Your Soul. It's written by Allison Cook and Kimberly Miller. They actually said they were excited that we were going to be talking about their book here online and in our group. Next week, we're going to come back and we're going to talk one more time about the challenging parts of others. We're going to talk about what does it mean, and how can we forgive when someone has harmed us in a way that makes it difficult for us to forgive. If you want to join us live for these meetings, you can go to meetup.com/checkyourcompass. Or you could check out the videos when we post them on YouTube and Facebook. Usually post them within a week of these meetings. So thanks for listening. God bless you.